Good afternoon and welcome to Free West Media uh, YouTube channel. And I'm privileged to be talking again to Katia Beeden. She's been very busy lately and she's part of this whole movement to the US. But if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. And we've got some fascinating conversations coming up soon. So good afternoon to you, Katja, there in Cape Town.
Hi, Dan. Hi, and thanks for having me again. It's always such an honor to chat to you.
Oh, well, you're flattering me. But anyway, yes,
No, actually,
we are
wait a minute. I
talking.
want to interrupt you for a minute. Don't, you
Yes.
say I'm flattering you, but I actually owe you something.
Oh,
I actually owe you a big thank you. You kind of launched my YouTube career in a way. You invited me to come and speak on your channel a couple of months ago, and we spoke about crime. And Sam Busser actually saw that podcast. And because of that, she invited me to be the spokeswoman for Amerikaners. And from there, I've just found myself in this kind of new role. So I actually have to thank you for that.
oh, well, yeah, I'm
Um,
glad. Yeah.
so,
Well, actually, on my Afrikaans channel, I've also had some interviews with people involved in the whole municipal I could call it the municipal resistance. People in all these plotland towns who just don't get any form of service anymore, service delivery. And I did an interview with someone, and then I think a few towns actually afterwards formed committees and whatever. So it set off a whole movement. So yeah, it's amazing what can happen on
yeah,
YouTube.
a
And
conversation. Yeah.
exactly. And today
Yeah.
we're talking about the dark times in the world, including in South Africa, but also elsewhere.
Totally. Hmm.
Um, because there are all kinds of wars. There are wars going on, and people are even talking about the Third World War in Europe. And there are more and more long-range missiles being used. And we've had this attack on Russia recently, Russian cities, and now there's going to be some form of response, counterattack from Russia. So in a day or two, maybe there could be some sort of World War III going on in Europe. Who knows? And I've got my daughter living in Europe, so I'm quite worried about her. I'll be worried about her in South Africa, but also about her in Europe. But let's start
Yeah.
off with this issue. A few days ago on Network 24, there was a report which was absolutely astonishing in that there was a farm murder last year on the 27th of September.
Hmm.
And, as I say here in Afrikaans, bejaard, he was an aged farmer, 81 years old,
Yes.
elderly,
Yeah.
and he was attacked at his farm gate and killed. Um,
Mm.
that was on the 27th of December last year, but then the suspects were rounded up and caught,
Yeah.
and there's been a court case going on in the magistrate's court since then. But a few days ago, because the police hadn't done their investigation properly and there had just been no progress on the case whatsoever, the magistrate removed the case from the roll, from the court roll, and that meant that the suspects were released. And so there's no longer actually any form of murder case going on until the National Prosecuting Authority decides to relaunch the whole investigation and the prosecution and whatever. But as a result of incompetence and sheer, lackadaisical kind of indolence or whatever, these murderers are probably at the moment they are getting off scot-free. Isn't that shocking?
It is absolutely shocking that you can just murder with impunity in this country. And that's why our murder rate is 84 murders a day, because the people kind of know that there aren't really any real consequences. And this case, this shocking case, is a classic example of how broken our justice system is. We don't have detectives, we don't have an operational police force. And, as a white minority, we've got this added layer where I feel that there's deliberate obstruction. Our lives are also just, if it's a farm murder, I think there's a hands-off approach to a large extent.
Yes, what you're saying, I mean, I know the statistic off by heart in that only 8% of murder cases in South Africa actually lead to a conviction. So you've got a 92% chance of literally getting away with murder in South Africa, which is absolutely horrendous. I think it must be, the highest in the world. It's
It
and
is.
this whole thing wouldn't even have been known if the lawyers representing the farmer, the deceased farmer and his family hadn't actually done a press release on this whole thing. Otherwise, nobody would even have known about it. And I
Yeah,
know
just another
other people have
life just shoved
responded.
under the rug. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So there's
just been
no
swept
value.
under the rug. The magistrate decided, no, I'll just remove this from the roll because the cops aren't doing their job and the prosecuting authority isn't really pursuing this either. So, yeah, apparently a senior prosecutor indicated that the case should be transferred to the regional court, but nothing was done about this. So just wasn't done. So it sort of fell through the cracks, and that was it.
So these guys are just free to go, and I can almost put all my money on it that they will probably kill again.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, and I often wonder about all of these cases. You never hear afterwards what happened to these criminals. I mean, there was one horrific case some years ago in Pretoria, where, a young girl, Christian girl, um, and she was a student at Tucky's, and she lived in a townhouse in Pretoria. And then one night, some black guy who was actually a criminal. He'd been incorrectly released on bail of something like 1,000 rand, but he was on rape charges and everything as well in this other case. But the state released him, and then he broke into a house, held her up, raped her, and then tried to kill her. He cut her throat and everything. Eventually, she managed to crawl out. It was a horrific story. She managed to crawl out and eventually survived miraculously this whole attack. But she also had to have, I think, plastic surgery and so on, because he kind of lacerated her face and everything. And he raped her while she was bleeding to death. I mean, it was just something out of a horror. It
Yeah.
was a complete horror story. But eventually the parents and the girl, they got some form of payout from the state because there was a clear negligence there. But the name of that rapist was William Kakana. I remember that distinctly. And you never hear afterwards, what happened to these people. When they are released, how long they stay in prison, and so on. I mean, when Janis Volus was released from prison, it was front page news, and even his first, I think he qualified for parole in 2015, but they kept him for another 8 or 9 years in prison, contrary to the advice of and the regulations of the Correctional Services Department. Those sorts of political cases, you hear about them, but something like that, where it's a criminal case, horrific, and under the old system, somebody like that would have got the death penalty. He probably deserves the death penalty. So a kind of a completely perverse individual like that who would do something like that. But you never hear afterwards, well, about them. Whether they do 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or whatever. And I suspect a lot of them probably just get released to make way for more, because the prisons are overcrowded as it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, if you think about it, the number one job of any government is to keep their citizens safe. That is their main priority. And this is just another example of how the ANC government, which is actually now the GNU, we can't let the DA off the hook here, has fundamentally failed its citizens. We have porous borders, we've got a broken criminal justice system, ineffective policing, And it's not just the farmers who are being attacked on the farms. I mean, this girl is a classic example of someone living in the suburbs who was violently assaulted and attacked in her own home. So it's just more manifestation of the fundamental brokenness and violence in the society in which we live. And I know that sounds really dark, but we are living in very dark and scary times right now. And it's really, really concerning.
Yes, it is. And one, if you look back in history too, I think there have been times like that in South Africa, and there were all those massacres in the 19th century as well. About 10% of the fur trackers were actually killed. It was a mass murder. And a genocide, really. If 10% of the population gets killed, I think that counts as a genocide. And that we had in the 19th century. And for a while during the 20th century, things sort of stabilized and we had proper policing and so on. But I think we're back there. We're back in the 19th century and it's just anything goes and the system doesn't work and nobody really cares. The government certainly doesn't care as long as they've got their blue light brigades. I mean, there were some statistics the other day about how much money they spend. I think they spent 1.8 billion rand on the protection for the ministers, for the cabinet ministers, and another few hundred million rand on overtime for their own bodyguards. And of course, there's this new scandal about Paul Mashatile, who went to Japan.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
I think it cost a few million rand just for him to go to
26, I think
Japan.
it was.
Yes,
For a week for him and his wife or whatever
yes,
for a quick trip.
yes,
Unbelievable. Disgusting. Disgusting.
yes. So you really wonder where we are going, but now you're one of the people who have stated that you want to leave South Africa, but then how safe is it elsewhere? How safe is it? Well, for example, in Europe, where we sort of almost on the verge of a third world war at the moment, and with all these missiles flying around, and threats of escalation all the time, even though there are peace talks going on, it seems to me that quite a lot of the countries in Europe and in NATO, and particularly Britain, they want some form of a war with Russia, and that's going to plunge the entire continent into hostilities. And it's just seems so irrational to want to sacrifice civilians and economies, and like as happened twice before in the 20th century. For what? Um, it's just insane. And then in the
It,
US, there's this whole spat between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and which also seems like a very silly thing to occur. I mean, why would they have to have a public tiff like that? And
I think
think of all the
it's
damage it does to the country and to the image of the US and the presidency and even Elon Musk himself. And then the Afrikaner refugees who are on their way to America. I mean, if things can just turn like that and suddenly change, and it just doesn't make a very professional impression on one, does it?
So just a couple of things there you mentioned. First of all, just back to Europe, their open border policy has made sort of Paris, London, and all the main cities in Europe just as dangerous as walking through Johannesburg. I mean, as a woman, you will get raped, you will get robbed, and people are being knifed and murdered on the streets and pickpocketed and mugged. So that open border policy has basically made what used to be the safest nations in the world just as dangerous as the rest of Africa. Um, and with regards to this war, they are absolutely provoking this war. They want war, and I think it's money. They're making money through weaponry, through that whole dark black market system. So war is actually profitable to some people because it's business, it's money and power. They're not thinking about peace. They're not thinking about the citizens. They're not thinking about people that just want to raise their children and educate their families and live their lives. These are crazy, power-hungry men. And someone actually put a post on X that I reposted about the insanity of the type of men that are in power and making these kinds of decisions. I mean, you've got Macron, who's got all that controversy around his transgendered wife, and I believe that she is a man. I do believe that. I believe there's been a grand deception on the French people. You've got Keir Starmer, and who's throwing his own citizens in prison for nasty so-called hurty words and tweets. Who's also got terrible rumors circulating around rent boys and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I mean, these are the kinds of people that are making life and death decisions around World War III. It's insanity. There's literally a bunch of psychopaths in charge, and I think that's why the world is such a dark place right now because we've got very weak, very evil, very egotistical men in power. We don't have God-led noble men leading the world right now, and that is what is so frightening. And then shifting to the US, I really hope that Trump and Elon resolve their spat in their conversation that's scheduled for today because the world suddenly feels even more dangerous with the two of them at loggerheads. We need America strong. We need those two to kind of kiss and make up. We don't need any other instability in the world right now because we're literally teetering. That's how I feel. It's unnerving.
Yes, exactly. Talking about Europe, I've, visited various countries and so on and lived in France for a while. And I remember back then, a woman could,
Mhm.
the metro stopped working at around 1 o'clock at night. And if you came home after that, I mean, a woman could walk for kilometers in Paris and she would be perfectly safe alone. Whereas
I
now,
remember
of
taking
course,
the night bus in London as a woman on my own, taking the night bus after a night out and going all the way back from the center of town to Richmond on the night buses and trains, and I was perfectly fine. You wouldn't dream of doing that now.
yes, exactly. And I mean, a country like Sweden, I don't know exactly what the statistic is now, but it's probably not, the murder rate is not all that high there, although the
Rapes.
rapes have gone up through the roof. But something like 45 people get murdered in Sweden per year, per annum, whereas that's less
We're
than,
84 a day.
yeah,
That's
we've got something like what, 57 per day or something.
84.
84.
This,
Okay, we're at 84 per day, and they're at 45 per year. But when
insane.
it comes to the insecurity for women, of course, yes, and it's almost comparable. And there are thousands of rapes every year, and in Germany as well, knife attacks in
It's
Germany.
criminal that they've allowed that in those countries. It is unforgivable and criminal, and it's
Yes,
just
but
nonsense.
I saw a speech. I've been learning Italian over the last year or two, just online, but
Wow.
so I can sort of follow a bit of Italian. Um, say in Georgia Maloney speaking, and she made a very good speech the other day against old Macron, where
I have
she
so much
really,
respect for her. I really
yes, where
like.
she really, flew into him and told him his fortune, as it were.
Who did
And
she fly into?
Macron, the
Oh,
president of
right.
France. Yes, it was a public attack on Macron, and because he had said something about Italy, and she responded, and she accused him of colonialism for, and
Oh, I
saying
know.
that
Yes.
Macron wants all the Africans to come to Europe, but she wants them to stay in Africa and develop there. And then she also used the example of Niger, where France gets its uranium from, um, for its electricity to generate through electricity through its nuclear power stations. But she said that, yes, and you, Macron, you leave the people in Niger themselves without electricity, something like that. But she had some very harsh terms that she used about him as well. So to me was a bit of a breath of fresh air. And
Need
she,
more of that.
one of the, yes, exactly. And I also like Alice Weidel from the AfD in Germany. She also makes very good speeches, and she's also been very vocal in her opposition to this kind of laissez-faire immigration into Germany. But the Germans are, I mean, the German what did it call, security service, or the state security, they actually want to ban the AfD. They want to ban a legitimate political party, and they're just waiting for some court to make such an order, and then they will actually ban it.
These are
Just
these
like
facts I'm
Marine
talking
Le
about.
Pen has been, she was banned by the court from participating in the next presidential election on some charge to do with the finances, the way her party
A
used.
made up, trumped up charge. I mean, let's be
Exactly.
honest.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
smoke.
it's something pretty innocuous. I mean, it wasn't money that was embezzled or anything like that. It was just kind of misallocated from the party's coffers in Brussels to the party's coffers in France. But ultimately, I mean, the money comes from France anyway, that flows to Brussels. So, and they could just have told her, okay, pay it back to the party in Brussels or something like that. But no, she was banned from participating in an election for 5 years, effectively, therefore, ending her campaign for 2027. So, I mean, democracy is also under threat worldwide when it doesn't suit these oligarchs and the military industrial complex. They would just get a court order from some judge that was bought, or that's making an ideological decision, and then they get what they want. So, and you also look at the courts here, all the insidious judgments that we've had, including this thing on killer Boer, killer farmer. I mean,
They're
the
not being
entire bench in South Africa, from the Gauteng court right straight up to the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein to the Constitutional Court, they've all authorized, they say it's freedom of speech for Malema to sing Killer Boer, Killer Farmer anywhere he wants, anytime. Isn't that? And then at the same time, if you use like an off-color racial term somewhere, you would be prosecuted for that. I mean, this farmer in Kuruman was killed. His murderers are walking off scot-free. But if you use some form, an Arabic word, because one day I was listening to RSG, and then they were explaining that Afrikaans was partly an Arabic language and a Khoisan language. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard any Arabic or Khoisan, but it doesn't sound like Afrikaans at all. I mean, it's just a crazy supposition. And then we're talking about the Arabic influence in Afrikaans. Now, the only Arab word I
I'm
can
not
think
buying
of,
into that. That's not sitting well in my spirit, that
yeah,
theory. I'm
yeah,
not
but the
feeling
only Arabic word I can think of in Afrikaans and in English for that matter is the K word. Now, if you use this Arabic influence in Afrikaans, then you get sent to prison. But Malema can get away with, calling for genocide.
well,
Is
that's a
that?
clear example of the racism in our. We've got a racist government and racist rules and racist laws and race quotas. I mean, just it's a classic example of that. That's how South Africa is. It's just like in the UK, we've got this two-tier justice system. Well, we've got the two-tier justice system here as well. What's allowed for one is not allowed for the other. So Malema can sing "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," but Ronaldo Gous, for example, is a classic example when he was calling Malema out 15 years ago and reversing it and using it as an example. He was, persecuted and fired from the DA and all the rest of it for that. Um,
Yes,
so it's
exactly. And um, it was in such bad faith because, I mean, during the introduction to his video that he made, what was it, in 2010 or something like
10
that?
years ago. Yeah.
I mean, surely there must be some sort of what do you call it,
Statute of
statute of
limitations. Yeah.
limitations, yeah, on that, yeah, on in word that you used 15 years ago or something. But he didn't even use it in that sense to insult
Oh,
anyone. He used it as he gave it as an example.
correct. Correct.
So
To prove
um,
that kill the boo, he was basically saying kill the boo, kill the farmer is hate speech and is hurtful. And to
exactly.
make that example, I'm going to mirror it around and use the K word and see how that sounds.
Yes.
That's all he was doing. So he wasn't being deliberately insulting. He was just trying to prove a point. And as we know, that just, but it's just another classic example of how we don't have real justice and real laws and our courts are captured, our judges are captured, our police are corrupt and captured. We don't have real law and order. We don't have a real justice system that you can sit and trust and feel solid and safe in. There is no safety is a luxury in this country, and we don't have it anywhere. It's it's a banana
Yes,
republic.
you're right. I mean, I live in a kind of a gated community, but as soon as you go outside, then you're also a target. And I mean, I know various people who also live in gated communities, but when they go out, they take off all their jewelry and their watches, and they're also, I mean, even leaving their cell phones at home because they're scared of losing their cell phones because all their bank apps are in their cell phones and so on. So you take a cheap cell phone and you kind of dress down and you just kind of melt into the crowd, as it were, because a lot of people with jewelry and that sort of thing have been followed home and they have been held up. I know one wealthy lady to whom that's happened, and she hasn't worn jewelry in public ever since. So yes, it's a completely abnormal society that we are living in. It is unsafe, and people fear for their lives. They fear for being mugged or attacked or carjacked, hijacked.
And look how we've been brought down to a lower standard now because now I have to down dress. I have to not wear my jewelry. I can't use my nice handbags. So now instead of being inspirational and motivational and feeling good, we're having to make ourselves smaller, making ourselves insignificant, making ourselves unattractive. It's just like being in an abusive relationship. And yeah, it keeps you safe, but for long-term thriving, it's not an environment that's inviting in life and abundance and expansion and growth. It's contracting energy. Make yourself small, make yourself invisible. Don't get hurt, don't die. It's not sustainable long term. It's just
Yes,
not.
and
It's not
economically as well. South Africa used to be among the top 20 economies worldwide. We were sort of between 18 and 20, around about there.
terrible to
I
think.
mean, we're not a huge economy, but we aren't we didn't used to be that insignificant either. Whereas now we slid down to about number 38 and we still going down. And I was speaking to Chris Hart, he's an economist, on this very channel a few weeks ago, and he told me that if it hadn't been for the ANC, our economy would have been 3 times bigger now.
Oh, yeah.
So
Sad to
imagine that, 3 times more jobs, um, much less unemployment, and there would have been so much more prosperity. The rand would have been stronger. Um,
The
it's just
BEE hasn't worked.
yes,
It's
exactly.
contracted
I mean,
the
yeah,
economy. It hasn't expanded it.
yeah, and if you compare to the US, I think over the last 20 years or so, the US economy has trebled in size, and the same could have happened to us. But instead, we've got this crazy kind of quasi-Marxist
Yeah.
government, anti-white government, and yeah, and they've actually throttled the economy in favor of all the of 142 race laws so that they can loot the country and dish out contracts to their cronies. That's what South Africa is now about.
Yeah.
So the question
So
is, how do we? Yeah, is there an out of this? I mean, you saying that one should go to the US, join the stream of refugees to the United States, which I suppose is one way of escaping from South Africa. come
I mean,
round to.
you see, this is how hopeless I feel I am. I feel we are literally at that stage where any choice you make is a hard choice. Your choices are you can just bury your head in the sand and go into denial and stay in your gated community. And if you're in your later years, you might think, oh well, I'm old anyway, so I'll just hang in there, okay? Or you can. There's a lot of these very far leftists who live in their mansions and on their golf estates who think there's no problem, that there's nothing wrong, okay, everything's fine because in their little bubble everything's fine. I'm actually kind of glad that I'm not like them and I'm not in that fake bubble. I'm actually glad that I've got my boots on the ground in the rawness of life and actually know the reality of what's really going on. But yeah, that's an option. One could choose to stay and kind of hang on tight, but that comes with tremendous risk. Or you can try and change things, but I've given up on that. I personally just don't, I think we're not salvageable. I think we're a sinking ship. I just don't think the type of change that this country needs isn't going to happen in any of our lifetimes. And I don't have the energy for that. I just want to go get on and live my life and expand and grow my business and thrive. I'm so tired of bleeding energy on toxic, going nowhere deadness. I don't have the time and the patience for it anymore. And then the other option is to leave. I mean, what's that old adage in life? You've got three options. Uh, Nothing, stay, nothing changes, or try and change it, or leave. I mean, those are our options, and they're all hard options right now. I
True.
don't know what you think.
I've been trying to change the situation now for 20, 25 years, but it's also very hard because you take big risks and financial risks and risks to your reputation. I mean, I've been attacked by journalists and media, and I was kind of ambushed by some New York TV crew that came here and really wanted to, present me in a very bad light, and were very dishonest in doing that. So you take all those risks, and in the end, yeah, it doesn't seem to have much of an effect. I mean, people do come up to me and thank me for what I've been doing and so on, but you still can't really see that it's had any results. I mean, we're still stuck in the current situation. But on the other hand, what I find very hard to accept is that we should just die as a nation with everything that we've achieved in the past and all our struggles and the Great Trek and so on, and that we should just disappear because of some decision taken. Because
But
I
Dad, let me just stop you there. Here's a different perspective, and this is something Ronaldo brought up the other day. Okay, think about all of us that are here in South Africa. Okay, we've all got Dutch or Scottish or French or whatever ancestors. Okay, they left Europe because of persecution, and they came here. Okay. So our ancestors weren't these cowards who gave up. They were brave pioneers who left something that wasn't good to find something better. So the choose to leave is not cowardly. The choose to leave is not giving up. It's not failing. Our government has failed us. We haven't failed South Africa. It's like in an abusive relationship, the abuser isn't going to change. And trying to stay and please the abuser and trying to appease the abuser isn't going to create a better life for you. You're just going to end up getting hurt. And if you choose to bravely leave that relationship, you haven't failed. The abuser has actually failed you. So we might just have to be pioneers like our ancestors and bravely forge new waters wherever that may be. And for some people, that might be America. And for some people, that might be somewhere else in the world. And for some people, they're going to choose to stay. And that's okay. That's a choice. And I admire those Afrikaners that say, ons bly net hier. I get that. I respect it. But I think that comes with risk. It comes with something. And there are people for whom that is the right decision. And I honor that. But there's people like me where that is not a possibility and it's not an option. So hard choices need to be made right now. It's not easy.
well,
It's dark.
the way I see it, we are really in survival mode. And I think generally, people of European descent are in survival mode because there's also this whole demographic crisis and the demographic winter and so on, and the Italians dying out there. They say the Italian population is going to shrink from about 58 million down to 25 million. I mean, you can
Wow,
now
that's radical.
get a house in Italy for €1 because there are just no people left uh, to take care of these homes, and the Italian government will give it to you for nothing, provided that you live there and sort of maintain it and fix it up a bit. So there's that crisis, but definitely we're in survival mode here economically, as a result of all these racial laws, and also regarding our security, and also demographically, because I think it's very hard for people to have children when things are unsafe. I mean, you think about, your unborn child who's gonna be exposed to all of this, and people put off the decision to have children, and then it's like it's a kind of a snowballing problem. But I definitely, South Africa is twice as large as France in surface area. And I've got this one friend who once told me that, in the run up to the 1994 election, he bought himself a farm somewhere in the mountains in the Cape Province. And there's only a dirt road leading there. And it takes about an hour to an hour and a half along that road to get there. There's no cell phone signal there whatsoever. And it's just out there in the mountains, and nobody would even know you were there. And he's got some cattle roaming there and so on. So, and that was his kind of place of refuge in case things went
Very
downhill in
good.
South Africa. So I think you could survive out there in the wilderness, as some sort of a pioneer or something like that, like we used to do in the past. And because the cities are probably going to be the less safe
But
places
you see,
in South
I'm
Africa.
representing people like me who don't own land, who don't own property. Okay. What does someone like me do? A woman on her own who doesn't have property, who doesn't own a farm, who can't live in the cities. You see, that's why someone like me, when you go look at fight, flight, flee, okay,
Mm,
whatever it is,
mm.
you've got to weigh up your options. And for me, I think running is probably the safest option. For that guy with that farm, he can stay and fight and survive. He's got that land tucked away somewhere, but we don't all have that luxury of a refuge. We have to
Yeah, I
find
suppose that's true. I don't have a piece of land out there either, but I'm sure
that's a
if I,
luxury.
if I asked this friend of mine, can I also come and hide out on your farm, he'll probably tell
But
me
two
come
million
along.
of us can't go and
Yeah,
do that.
but I think I've just, in actual fact, I'm currently proofreading a thing I translated from Dutch. It's a whole other topic, but it's a novel of about 700 pages set in the Middle Ages,
Mhm.
and what conditions were like then, and people also burnt at the stake for having the wrong opinions or not even the wrong opinions. And but it seems to me that this whole idea of having your own, building your own castle and protecting yourself from the outside world. I mean, that was very prevalent during the Middle Ages for hundreds of years, because there was also a lot of insecurity in Europe, and I see South Africa moving in that direction, and maybe even the whole world going in that direction because of the breakdown of law and order and the bad decisions made by all these leaders. So you will have to look after your own security and your own community, and be armed, and also be ready to being attacked in the dead of night, or having a crowd assemble next to your wall.
Not
And
really a way to live. You see, but that's a survival energy.
hmm.
That's not a thriving energy. That's batten down the hatches and
but
you
I
ready.
think we are living in a kind of a sci-fi dystopia.
We are.
Yeah, the 20th century was almost, well, we also had two world wars, of course, and the Korean War and border war inside, Namibia and so on. But still, there was this kind of a stability for most of the second half of the 20th century that was fairly unique. And it seems that we are now moving into a new age of insecurity. And whether it's here or in Europe or even in the Far
The
East,
whole world is unstable right now. I mean, there is no real
I mean, if you
solid.
look at the situation in Israel and Gaza and Palestine and all that, I mean, that's also an horrific drama playing out as we speak. I mean, where in you, yeah, it's
And just look
just,
at our own continent of Africa. I mean, I know from all the different Uber drivers that I've spoken to from Rwanda and Congo and all over Africa. I mean, the stories that they've told me about the violence from their countries is just horrendous. So even just on our own continent, there's just so much violence and instability and the whole of Africa, let us not kid ourselves, not just here in South Africa. We're on a very, very frightening, dark continent. So it's all over the world right now. And I know this all sounds very heavy and very dark, but this is the reality of what we're having to navigate right now. And I think we need to have our eyes wide open so we can make good choices for ourselves moving forward.
yes, you're perfectly right. But it seems to me that there are um, kind of, well, not only two options, but immediately it seems to me that you could either choose to put your faith in a system or a system of government, a better system of government, say in the United States or in a certain state in the United States, a red state, and not California or Oregon or someplace. Um, or you could revert more towards a kind of a tribal model where you are trying to work with people like you who and where you are bound by culture and blood and descent
That's the
and try and
biblical way,
yeah
you know.
and and try and survive that way. And so it's kind of two. I suppose it could be a combination of the two as well.
I'm going to go one higher than that, okay? We shouldn't actually be putting our faith in any systems. And this is what I have to keep reminding myself and the people that keep DMing me in a panic with regard to the refugee program. I'm a Christian, all right? I'm a conservative.
Mm.
That's my base. That's the worldview and the lens that I look at life through. And at the end of the day, we can't put our trust in man, in systems, and in governments. At the end of the day, and I think Afrikaners can really relate to what I'm going to say because we're a deeply religious community and Afrikaners are deeply spiritual and religious. At the end of the day, God is in control. And God is going to lead us to where we need to be. And some of us are going to be led to America. Some of us are going to be led to South America. Some of us are going to be led to family members in other parts of the world. And some of us are probably going to be led to stay. And I think on a spiritual level, we must just always remind ourselves as we explore these tribal options, as we explore these refugee and immigration options, I think we always just have to remember that ultimately we have to like ask the man upstairs where he's leading us, just like he led the Israelites out of Egypt, because that's how I feel right now. I feel like we're the Israelites being oppressed in Egypt by the evil Pharaoh, which is the ANC, and we need to really turn to our faith and be led. And I think where we get led is different for each person. Each person's got to go within and decide what is right for them. I don't think there's a one fits all answer here. I think it's more complex than that.
Well, I can relate to that, and this whole idea of the Exodus, I I think it should be debated, and people should and should be discussed,
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely. To make
also,
the right, yes, I agree.
um,
I'm not
I
saying be a
also
religious
firmly
fanatic.
believe
Hang
that
on, can I just clarify
mm,
something here? I'm not saying, as a Christian, we just say, oh, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just sit here and wait for God to make decisions. Because I had people attacking me on X for that. Oh, so what? I'm going to just sit back and do nothing now. No, God wants us to rely on Him and lead us, okay? And we listen to His guidance. We listen to the still small voice of the Holy Spirit. And what does the Holy Spirit do? The Holy Spirit says, go there, do that, talk to that person, hook up with that person, okay? It's very action based. But what I'm saying is we need to tap into our higher power to make the right decisions. The reason why the world is in such a mess right now is man is trying to run it himself. And not we have godless societies. When we look at
Yeah,
the
that's very true. We have,
that's really what I'm
we,
trying to get
yeah,
at. Okay.
sure, sure.
Um,
Yeah, I lived in France, so I know that in 1905 or so, they had some socialist government, and they banned religion in schools altogether. You're not even allowed to wear a cross or anything like that, or say the Lord's Prayer or anything.
Tragic.
Yeah,
And and
and
look
and
what happened.
and the state doesn't spend any money. Well, I suppose there's some money spent on restoration, like the Notre Dame that burnt down and so on, but the state is not allowed to support the church, but the state does support Islam.
Yeah.
They do donate land for mosques, and they actually subsidize mosques. So the Islamization of Europe is being subsidized by the
It's a
taxpayers.
spiritual war that we're going on right now. It really is spiritual warfare. And yeah, it's the older dodge. If we go back in history, you love history, okay? If we look at history, it's the Christians being persecuted always.
Yes, that's true. But I was thinking of something else that I wanted to mention. Oh yes, I don't see this government really as it's not the main problem. I think the main problem is more the governments overseas, the ones who have installed them in power in
Correct.
South Africa. I've just read it was like a PhD study done by a friend of mine in the Netherlands. And in fact, the Netherlands, Sweden, and a few others, and maybe the Soviet Union, they financed, they organized, they had a whole campaign going, a war against South Africa, and they conquered us, not the ANC. The ANC were just extras in somebody else's movie, and I think they are still extras. I mean, they could, if if the US government, for example, took certain measures, um, you know, took them South Africa from SWIFT and banned MasterCard and Visa in South Africa, the same sort of policies that they have against Iran and Russia. I mean, the ANC wouldn't last a week. They would just be gone. But they were appointed over us by all of these left-wing governments in Europe, and that has unleashed all of this misery and crime and chaos in South Africa, and that's the real debate that should also be,
Now
uh,
you're hitting.
yeah,
Now you're hitting.
there should be a real debate between us and the Europeans, and we should tell them, you've made it intolerable for us here. So do we now have the right to all go back to Europe, and where are we going to be settled, and what sort of rights and finances and whatever are we going to have there? And
You
I
notice
think
how
for
chip
many
still they are.
elderly,
Have you noticed how quiet Europe is about it, though?
yeah,
Not a
sure.
peep.
I mean, like Sweden played a major role in this whole thing. I mean, the Swedish ambassador here in South Africa in 1990, no, 2004, he said that without Sweden, the ANC would not have come to power. So
The
fine.
band.
I think for a lot of elderly people left in South Africa, if they could all get onto airplanes and go to Sweden and get their healthcare and their kind of old age stipends and so on, they could live very well there and be cared for properly, unlike here where the state hospitals have collapsed. And yeah, and that could be the price that Sweden would have to pay for having made that error in judgment in, appointing these radical quasi-Marxist people to rule us in South Africa. And if there's going to be an exodus, where should it be to and on what terms and so on? So
That's
I
why I
think,
think the other
but I
countries should
think
be open.
Trump has started the whole thing,
Yeah, it shouldn't just be
and
America.
it
The
shouldn't
other
just be America. Yes, exactly. The others, Germany. I mean, I was
Australia.
flabbergasted one day when I sort of tweeted something, I think to the ex-ambassador from Germany in South Africa, and then he tweeted back, that they were very proud of the role that the GDR, East Germany, played in bringing the ANC to power. So the current Germany is proud of their role, of their communist, East German section or territory at the time, under Soviet influence, the Soviet sphere of influence, in the role that they played in bringing the ANC to power. So if that is the case, Germany, the current unified Germany, is as responsible as Sweden, the Netherlands, France, and all the others that were involved in this whole kind of hybrid war against South Africa. And that's the real discussion that we should be having, don't you
I
think?
agree. Absolutely. You've just gotten to the real roots of the rot and where this all stems from. Um, but it's just interesting how quiet they all are not. Like I say, no one is talking about it. It's gone very, very quiet. And I saw on X the other day, um, there was a post put out where the Dutch had brought up the issue in Parliament and were kind of speaking out against kill the boot, kill the farmer. And a whole lot of people were commenting, and it was interesting how many of the Dutch and Belgian people jumped in and said, "Yes, but they've already been in Europe 400 years. They're not European anymore. They're African." Like making it very clear, like even though there's a potential genocide happening, even though they're singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," and there's all these murders happening. Sorry, we don't want them back here. They're African. They're African, and I thought that was really, really interesting that thinking, like that total abandonment. Like they've created this whole mess here in Africa and then just abandoned us here and with no willingness to let us get to safety. I found that really interesting and I don't have an explanation for it. I'm still kind of
Yeah,
trying to make
that's
sense.
probably the leftist perspective, I would say. I think there are a lot of people in Europe who are concerned about us, but they more on the right or on the conservative or the Christian side. So, but I think that's a debate worth having, and we should be calling on them to state their case. And but
These
on maybe
shady types won't have the debate because the people that are responsible for installing the ANC are dark, dark people with dark, dark agendas that don't really want their agendas revealed. I think it's a lot darker than it seems.
you're right. Okay, and on that dark note, this was a dark conversation about the dark times. Thank you very much um, for this lively discussion. And Katja, and then I'm sure we'll have another one in the not too distant future. And
Thanks for having me again.
my pleasure. Until then, goodbye. And thanks for viewing until now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you've watched up to this point. Thanks. Goodbye.